Here I'm going to show you how to make a nice searchable interface in Excel. And it's going to work like this. Let's say we want to see all the sales data for Judge Dredd. Go over here, choose the field, search by name, search, and we see all of his data. Now the main goal of this is to be able to work with the data down here so you can see it all on one sheet. I added the chart as kind of an afterthought, but it does make things visually a bit more interesting and perhaps exciting. And here I'll walk you through every step you need to create an interface like this. Now it may seem similar to the last tutorial for the master stock chart analysis in Excel, but this one's a bit different because the main focus is just on the data down here. And in this part I'll show you how to do it where all the data is kept on the same worksheet and tab. There are quite a few considerations when doing that. And in another part, a later tutorial, I'll show you how to do it where your data is dispersed throughout the workbook. That's going to be a little bit more involved with code. But in this one, we will also be using a macro, and I will cover every step of that towards the end of the tutorial. Before we start, check the video description and click the link to TeachExcel so you can download the files for the tutorial and follow along. And make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials. So let's go ahead and open up a fresh worksheet and start on the interface. So I'm going to rename this one to main back, and we shall call this one main. Okay, so we want to go from this all the way to this. And one important consideration before you even start is that you have to remember that however you format your data up here to make this table look nice, it's going to filter down to the table below it. It's going to filter to all this data. So you don't want to have your data columns down here, which you want to be able to view. You don't want to have them all smushed and messed up. Since we want to make sure our data is displayed correctly, let's go ahead and put the data over there first. I'm going to clear the filter, and I'll explain the filters in a moment. Copy everything. And let's go ahead and paste the data. Now when you first get your data into Excel, it's not going to automatically be a table. So let's go ahead and make it regular data and remove all the formatting. Okay, so here we have our sample data. Don't worry about that for now. It's just sample sales data. And what we want to do is to create our interface. It's a good thing, if you want to create something that looks nice, by the way, to make these little edges there so that nothing is completely against the edge of Excel. So we're going to go ahead and reserve one column for that and one row for that. And let's think about the fields that we want to have. So I want to have an input field and a field field. Now when you're designing this, you oftentimes want to have a little spacer in between the two fields, but it's important to remember that if I do it like this, which I might do, it smushes the year down here. So that's why you want to have your data on the tab already. So I can say maybe year could be this big. Now let's go ahead and get two buttons. Insert tab, illustrations, shapes, rounded rectangle, create one button, then Control C, Control V, now we have two. Let's just click it and add some text. This one I believe is show all. And what is this one? Search? Yeah. Search. Now I'm going to click this one, hit Control and click this one, and let's format it together. Make it so it goes in the center, center, perfect, and put a little bold. I find that's pretty much all you need to do. Now, what we want to do here is let's make this a spacer row. Since we're not going to have any data over here except for the chart, it doesn't matter how we mess up the rows, if we make little tiny rows or not. Just the columns we have to watch out for here. So here's where I'm going to have the input cell, and this is going to be the field cell. Let's make these guys bold and center them. Just a little bit of formatting can really go a long way when you're doing this. Maybe we'll make this bigger. Click one button, hit Control, click the other. Now right click. Can be a bit finicky, but go to Group. Now we can move these guys as a single unit. Nice. And let's figure out where our box should be. So if I highlight these cells, we can see this looks like kind of a decent box. So let's go ahead and change the background color. And let's put a little border on it. Lots of options to choose from here. And let's select our input cells, background color to white. Okie dokie. Now I want to make these a little bit bigger. And actually, let me back that up. Okay, click the buttons, then kind of go towards the edge, right click, go to size and properties. We can change it for both of them now. In previous versions of Excel, this will open up in a pop-up window. Go to the properties, don't move or size with cells. And I don't think we hit OK over here. Nope. Okay. Now we can make these a little bigger. And our buttons do not change size. Exactly what we want. And let's grab them, pull them down here a little bit. Okay. So now we have a box that looks pretty decent. Let's go down here, give some formatting to the numbers. Okay, we need to make this a little bigger. Okay, so you can play around with the formatting for as long as you want to get this to look nice. Really, the only consideration is that you have data down here that you also want to be displayed in a nice way. So you have to think about that before you start making a bunch of changes. This aspect can be rather annoying and time-consuming. So I'm going to quickly end it right after I fix this guy. I want to remove all formats. Go down here, add a border to the right side. Okay, now it looks semi-decent. Let's continue. So the first thing you want to do with your data down here is turn it into a data table. It's going to make your life so much easier, and this is really the big difference between the tutorial with a master stock chart and this one. With that one, we needed a bit more flexibility. Here, we're only dealing with one set of data, so it'll make life so much easier. Let's turn this into a table. We just click anywhere in the data set, go to Insert, Table. Usually the default selections are going to be okay. If your table has headers or not, which it should, make sure that's checked. Make sure it selected everything okay. Okay. Now it's a table. If you hate this format as much as I do, by the way, go to the Design tab. You'll see it when the table is selected over here on Table Styles, and choose something else. Really, anything else is going to look better in my opinion. So we can go with this one. Now, and this will make it a little bit easier when we're dealing with a macro, while you're still in the Design tab, go over here to the left where it says Table Name. Give it a very simple name that you will be able to understand. How about My Table? That's easy. Hit Enter, make sure it takes. This name already exists because I did it on the other worksheet tab. So let's go over here and rename this one because he's annoying me. My Table 1. Okay. My Table. And when we're dealing with the macros, we can then reference all of this data here using this name, My Table. Now we want to figure out how we're going to filter the data. That's actually the secret to all of this. We're just going to be doing a bunch of auto filters, but we're making a nice interface for it. So select this cell here and hit Alt-DL. We're going to Data Validation and just input the values you want the user to be able to select. So I'm going to do ID, then comma, and name. You don't have to put an equal sign or any quotation marks or anything here. You just type one entry, comma, another entry, comma, that's it. Hit OK. Now we have a nice little drop-down list. Now the spelling here does not have to be the same as the spelling down here. We don't have to worry about that in this tutorial, but we will reference this spelling later in the macro. As you can see, we are pretty much almost done with the formatting. Now you can change it as much as you want, add more fields if you want to filter on more columns basically, or however you want that to work. But that's pretty much all for the formatting. Now let's go ahead and add a chart really quickly because it does make things look a little better. So select anywhere in your table, go to Insert, select your chart, we'll keep it nice and simple. Now the chart here, I want to make it a little smaller you don't want the chart to hang over any of this data down here, because the way that this data in this simple example is going to work is it's going to hide the rows that we don't want to be seen. Or just right-click the chart. Okay, right-click it somewhere else. There you go, until you see this menu here. And down towards the bottom, you're going to see an option that says Format Chart Area. You can also get to it if you go to Format and then click, well, Format Selection. Go to the right over here, we're going to Options, go to Don't Move or Size with Cells. So you can do that, and then you can have it hang down over here if you want. Now, there are a lot of things you can do to make your chart look better. I don't want to cover them all here because it can get rather tedious, but I'll show you a couple cool things. First of all, let's make the chart title change based on what we put in here. Click the chart title, go to the formula bar, hit equals, select the cell, hit enter. Now, anything we type here, going to appear up here. So we know this is the sales data for Thanos. Nice and cool. Now let's go down here. I don't like the way that this is appearing. So what I want to do, click the chart, go to go to Design, select Data. Let's go to Horizontal Category Access Labels. This is actually a neat little thing you might know, is you can combine columns for the category labels. So what this has done is it's combined ID and name. So if you want, just select the column for name, hit OK, hit OK, and you'll get the name. As well, let's go back there. For the legend entry, I do not want year. Take that guy out of there. And there we go. There's lots of different things you can do with it. Play with it on your own time to get it to look how you need it to look. But now let's deal with the macro. So the trick to doing all of this is that we're going to auto-filter this data. We're going to apply filters to it. You could do that yourself if you just go down here. Let's say we want to see Judge Dredd. Okay. But that's not really A, intuitive, or B, very pleasant as far as the interface is concerned. Now our chart looks nice and this looks nice, but when you send this out to Joe Schmo in another division, you have to figure if he knows how to do the filters or not. Is he going to mess up? Is he going to apply filters all over the place? When the only thing you want him to be able to do is to search by name or ID. That's the whole point of this tutorial. Let's go ahead and clear the filter. And let's make the macro. We're going to use two macros for this one. I'm going to keep it simple. We've got a search macro and a show all macro so we can get back to this view later on. One thing I forgot about the interface, by the way, go to View, remove the grid lines. That just makes everything a little bit nicer. So let's do the macro now. Hit Alt F11 on the keyboard to go to the VBA window. Download this file. I highly recommend that so you don't have to type all this by hand. First things first, I don't tell you to do this in every tutorial for macros because it's not technically required. But we are going to declare two variables and we're going to tell the macro what those variables are going to be used for. When you're dealing with things like worksheets and list objects, which I'll explain in a moment, it makes writing your code much easier. If you're just storing regular values, you don't really need to do that in small macros. But first things first, we want to store the worksheet, so the reference to the worksheet. So I created a variable main sheet that will be a worksheet. That's how the macro is going to see it. And I created a variable myTable, which is a list object. So technically, if we go back here, this table that we created down here is now referred to within Excel, within its code, as a list object. That can seem confusing at first, but it's really helpful to know that when writing code. There are other ways to refer to the table without calling it a list object, but that just makes your life a little bit more difficult. So just know tables are list objects. Here, this is the same name as my table in the worksheet, but it doesn't have to be. Call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter here. So the first thing we do after we have those variables is we set them equal to something. Here, we set the main sheet variable equal to our main worksheet. This right here is how you reference worksheets in Excel VBA. We do the same for our table. We set the table variable equal to our table. Now what do we do? Well, first, main sheet. This refers to sheets main, so it's the same as writing that in here. We've stored essentially this reference, although it's not text, it's essentially this reference in this variable. So now I can use this variable instead of writing sheets main. Now what do I want to get on sheets main? I want to get a list object. Remember, that's how we refer to tables. What list object do I want to get? I want to get the one called my table. Remember, my table, click in the table, go to design, give it the name over here and table name. Much easier to remember than table 1, table 2, table 3, and so on. Now we have to use set for these, but we don't have to use set for every variable. That's because we're setting this equal to a worksheet. We're setting this equal to a table. We're setting it equal to something instead of just a singular value. So here we're going to create two more things, user input and field name. And this is going to store the values, or retrieve the values from the worksheet that the user inputs here and inputs here. So input is cell C5, field is cell E5. So let's go here, Alt F11. Now I need to change this a little bit because I wrote this macro for the other worksheet and the formatting has changed a little bit. So we want to get it from the main sheet and we want to get it from range C5 and we want to get the value. That's for the user input. Field name follows the exact same format. Only thing we change is the cell from which the value comes. So now we have it set up, and these are the only things that you're going to need to change for your workbook if you do everything exactly the same as I did it here. So name of the worksheet, name of the table, and range references. Now once we have that out of the way, we do a quick little check here first. You can see this macro is very small. The first check is to see if anything is in the user input variable. So did the user input an ID number or a name? Yes or no? Well, here we say if the user input does not equal nothing. So it's basically the same as saying, did he put something into that cell? If he did, if the user input a value, then proceed. If he didn't input anything, well, nothing inside this if statement is going to run. And that includes the rest of our macro. If you wanted, you could put a little error message down here to say you didn't input an ID, you didn't input a name, and so on. And you could do that by just putting an else down here and having something like message box, yo man, input something. And then a message box would appear when he doesn't do that. I'll leave that here just for fun. Okay. Now let's talk about what happens when we go inside. I told you that we're going to be using filters for this. So the very first thing that you want to do when you have this data here is you want to make sure that no filters are currently activated. That just makes everything easy. Clear all your filters before you apply any other filters. So how we do this here, we refer to our table. This makes it so much easier. We don't have to write all of this each time we want to refer to the table. We just write my table. That's the table I want to deal with. We want to deal with the auto filter, and we want to show all data. Now when you're writing this out by hand, since we declared this as a list object, it's going to make programming easier, I told you. So my table dot, and it gives you a list of options. So you know that you're headed in the right direction. Hit the tab key, auto filter, dot. What do we want to do? I don't remember how it's spelled. Oh, show all data. Perfect. So it makes entering it quite a bit easier when we declare the variables. So we remove all filters, then we figure out what filters we want to apply. So that's what this section does right here. So field name, this is the value that we got from the field right here. Remember, here we can input ID or name. This is where the spelling is important. Does the field name equal ID? Make sure it's spelled the exact same way as in the worksheet drop-down menu. Or does the field name equal name? So if it equals ID, we go ahead and do a filter by ID. This is just a very simple auto filter. So The one difference between this and up here is we do have to type range. So we reference our table, then we type range, then autofilter, then we can fill out our regular autofilter arguments. These ones are very simple. We have a field and a criteria 1. If you want to see a larger example of this, you can go to the master stock chart tutorial. That's going to show you a bunch more autofilter examples in VBA. But the important thing here, let's go with field. Field means this. It's the column upon which we are going to apply a filter. This is our table down here. Let's zoom in a bit. So all of this is considered one, let's call it filter range, one filter object. And how it works is this. Each column is a field. The first column is field 1, the second column field 2, the third column field 3, and so on. Since all of our columns are connected and we're in a nice, neat little data table, we don't have to think about anything other than that. In a previous tutorial, there was a little bit more to it. But here, we have one section of data in our data table. ID is field 1, name field 2. So, for ID, we want to filter on field 1. Criteria 1 is what do we want to filter by? Well, I want to filter by the user input value that we got higher in the macro. So, whatever the user inputs here, that's what I want to filter by on ID. So you select ID, filter by an ID, and what its macro does is it says, okay, he wants to filter by ID, and he wants to filter by this ID, so we're only going to show everything or anything from the ID column that has 101 in it. And the field name works exactly the same. The field name works exactly the same. Go to our table, range, autofilter. This time we want to work on field 2 because name is in field 2. And criteria remains exactly the same, user input. So it's a very, very simple macro. And this is the macro that's going to work when we hit the search button. Now let's do the show all button really quickly. You could put all this in one macro, but I want to keep things simple. So I put it in a separate macro down here. This is what we're going to use to clear all of the filters. I declare the variables for main sheet and my table, just like we did above. But what I do here is I make sure to first clear any of the user inputs because we want to show everything. So we clear, this was C5 I believe, and E5. We go to main sheet, choose the range to clear, and set its value equal to empty quotation marks. So that clears these two guys up here. Then we clear the filter, mytable.autofilter.showAllData. All right, now to attach them to a button, all you do, right click, well, okay. Since they're grouped, we get this annoying thing, so just right click somewhere else. Assign the macro, searchable list simple, okay. Assign the macro, clear filters, okay. Now let's do a search without inputting anything. Yo man, input something. So there's our little error message. Kind of funny. All right, let's filter by 101. Since we mentioned that. Filter by field ID, search, and there we go. Now show all. Perfect. Let's do Thanos. Filtering by field name, search, and that's it. So I took a long time to cover all the particulars of the macro itself, but I wanted to do that so that you would be prepared and equipped to add more fields. So now you know how you can add more fields to the field name, then how you can filter by them, just changing the field down here, and then you can change the criteria if you have another input. So if you want to have an additional input, just do a new variable here, get the value from the worksheet, then add a new else if down here following the exact same format, do an auto filter following the exact same format. So this is kind of a bare bones example that lends itself really well to being expanded to work for very large sets of data or however you want to filter the data. The main thing really is being able to show the data on the same worksheet and have it appear nicely. So just remember that when you're creating this table up here, all of the column widths is going to affect everything below it. And that can very, very quickly mess things up. So I guess I'd say number one tip from this, aside from downloading it, getting the macro, and learning how to use it, is make sure that you put some of your source data on the tab before you start creating all of the table and the fields to input stuff up here. Now in the next version of this tutorial, as I mentioned, I will show you how to disperse the data between multiple worksheet tabs. So you could have thousands and thousands and thousands of rows between many different tabs and have the data dynamically appear down here without having it already input like it is here. So it could just be empty rows, empty columns of data, and then when you hit search, it all is magically filled in. That requires a bit more on the programming side of things, but it can be quite nice. But for now, for this tutorial, for a searchable list in Excel, for the easy version of it, that's all there is, and I hope you found it useful. I hope you liked the tutorial. If it was helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials.